Hi, I have a really special guest today because he's not only one of the most profound thinkers of our time, in my opinion, but he's also my sweetie pie and my husband, affectionately called Dr. Zeus, as Zeus, as in the Greek god, and that is his given name, not a Sedona name. And I just have to say, this is a little bit awkward because I don't have any cameras. I don't have a proper studio like at Gaia. We're doing all this via Skype and Zoom, and the only way to get us both on camera is to have him go upstairs. So he's sitting in the kitchen area, and I'm downstairs in my little studio area, and we're going to have this conversation. And the conversation is really been prompted by the subject of MeToo and the patriarchy, which is his wheelhouse. He's just finished writing and is in the process of editing his new book, The Spiritually Confident Man. We were going to wait to do an interview after the book came out, but all of this global Me Too thing happening right now is making this a timely conversation that we need to hear a new, fresh perspective on, and there's no one better I could think of to go to, no other author that has as profound a viewpoint on this as Zeus. So with that, hey Zeus, you're upstairs.
Hi, Regina. This might be the closest interview you've ever had.
I think so. At least we'll get a stable internet connection because we have some fast speed going here at the house.
Yeah.
The reason I wanted to talk to you about this is because people are confounded, and in a period where you have this kind of stuff rising, you also have reaction and overreaction in some cases. But it's time for it. As you say, the patriarchy is a state of devolution now at this time.
Yeah, and I want to, because it's oftentimes used as a kind of almost academic term or a term slung around. It's even used as a term to sort of, put down feminists. Patriarchy to me, the root of patriarchy basically means rule by men. But as I say in my book, and as I use it just in general, it means it's really a ruling mentality. It's a ruling mentality that emphasizes the ruler on the throne rather than what I call the provider of the feast. So it's a notion of putting people down and putting people under and using and taking their energy. And that's really what it's about. Now, there can be men who are not patriarch or who are anti-patriarchal. That is, they're givers. They fight against the injustice of takers ruling this world. And there are women who've submitted themselves to the patriarchy and are in some sense, good patriarchs themselves, being a part of the good old boy system. So that's, let's go ahead and get that straight right now.
Okay, and then I have a follow-up question. It's like a setup and follow-up question, and that is that when you were doing your PhD thesis on self-esteem, you really took a lot of women's studies classes.
Right.
You could have actually just taught in that area if you wanted to, which is, for a man. But I guess when I first met you, my question was, why did you take women's studies? What were you taking away from them?
Well, it has to do with the notion of patriarchy being the rule over other people. There's something fundamentally against my character and against my spirit in looking around and seeing, especially men, because usually it is men, involved in creating dominant situations that were repressing the creative ability, the caring ability of others to fully offer who they were into the world. And this really got to my heart. I grew up on a farm where I was taking care of lambs, literally, that had been rejected by their mothers, and I was cuddling up with them and, feeding them by hand. And then I have to compare that to a notion of what a man is supposed to be like within a patriarchal system, stern, controlling, dominant, and it just didn't square with me. I said, there's something wrong. I'm a man. This system of values doesn't reflect who I am at heart. And I started to look around for ways to really understand and uphold that sense of deep caring. And because of that, it led me to women's studies because men were they were kind of assuming the power in the system. And that's one of the very condemning things about patriarchy. It has men always looking outward, projecting the problems and responsibilities on someone else. And there's no room for interior reflection, emotional and intuitive engagement. And I was that kind of person, we sometimes allow it with gay men, but with heterosexual men, it's like there's no discussion there. So So that's what really began to compel me. Women's studies was a way for me to look into that subjectivity and also understand the damage that the ways in which traditionally men are asked to be is harming others, and in a way that was positive, in a way that had an alternative.
And on that note, one of the things that you informed me of, which I have used since in my my presentations and lectures when I'm at conferences, having to do with the origins of the species, but also this notion of, as David Icke titled one of his books years ago, it was called Get Up Off Your Knees. And the point was, we human beings suffer from a mass self-esteem issue. Mm-hmm. And you brought up something to me that was profound, and which is why I've incorporated it into presentations, which is when you were studying along the way, you also went into various studies in theology and in a critical view of the Bible, as in viewing it in a critical manner. You pointed out that the answer was right up front. And that is in Genesis 1 and 2, how this whole thing ultimately was set up the way it was for humans to feel less than. And that means men too, which is why they've had to feel as though it's necessary to dominate, to keep control of everyone around them in their own lives. So let's just set it up with Genesis 1 and 2, where the problem began.
Right. A lot of people don't know this. They don't know how radically contradictory and in some sense oppositional those two initial books of the Bible or verses of the Bible are. Genesis 1 basically goes a little bit into Genesis 2, but it basically is Genesis 1 is a starkly different version. It's the one that I resonate with than Genesis 2. I'll talk a little bit about these because they have they're a very good example of how our system is set up. Patriarchy tends toward the second version, the Adam and Eve version. That's Genesis 2. Genesis 1 basically has God creating the world as good, creating the lightness and the dark as an opportunity for humans to be able to make choices to engage. And in fact, the word good is used many, many times throughout Genesis 1 to describe creation. Creation is made in the image of God. Male and female, God created, right? At the same time, in God's image, there was no woman coming out of a man's rib. That was Genesis 2. And the God was a council. God was a we, not a me. So it was a cooperative endeavor.
So is it fair to, yes, it was a cooperative, and you hear this oftentimes as the great creators or the council of beings that create throughout the universe.
Right.
And so this is, it sounds like that is what it was referring to as this creative council of beings. And I like particularly what they had to say about their creation of this species, right? Yes.
I mean, first of all, the main difference between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is that in Genesis 1, the creation of human beings, animals, and the world is an original blessing. Like I said, it was said God said it was good many times and very good at the very end.
Including human beings for all of our whatever we are, right? And they
exactly. So it's not as if we're perfect, right? But that the gist of who we are is from a place of jubilee, and it's a place of miracle, it's a place of offering, and continuous with the highest elements of the universe, rather than the lowest. When you go to Genesis 2, it's a completely different story. There's punitive language there. There's a single God. It's a male God, pretty apparently, that makes man literally a male according to his image, and then creates female because that guy's lonely out of his rib, right? And then punishes that person for eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is our very conscience, our very operating system as a human being. It says, don't use it. Don't use your greater, intuitive capabilities and sense of morality. Just do what I say. So there was something odd going on here. First of all, Genesis 1 was written first, and Genesis 2 was written after that. I said, there's some kind of weird transition going here. These things are way too contrasting and way too different. Something is intervening here. Some force and governance system that was threatened by the full blossoming of the human being, and in particular, in this case, in later, the blossoming of the woman, because in the first instance, the woman was created equal to the man. In the second instance, the woman was created out of the man. So I'm like, something's going on here. You know, we got to look into this more deeply.
Well, just looking at that alone, if people were looking at it with a clear head, and you know, which in Sunday school, when we're all indoctrinated, right,
Mm-hmm.
you're not looking at it through adult or clear eyes. We would say, this is a flawed document. That's what you would take away. You can't
Right.
have that degree of contrasting information. But that said, when I read Chris Hardy's book, it was called War of the Anunnaki Gods. The thing that really struck me was the relationship between Enlil, who was basically a warring dominant god who set himself up on this planet as God, and
Mm-hmm.
whom those must obey. And it seems to me that Genesis was really based more, it had to have been based more on those Sumerian texts that
Right.
carried that forward from the days of their presence on this planet. And that was basically a being who was here, arguably an extraterrestrial being who was here, who simply set up shop and claimed himself as God. And this was carried on into our Judeo-Christian and even into the Muslim religions.
Right. And I would be embracing in that. And whether or not you think that this is extraterrestrial or an extra dimensional being, that is from a different
Right.
sort of dimensional north, or you just believe it is a human belief system and way of organizing society, it still boils down to the same thing.
Yes.
There is a ruling mentality, right, which says, I'm the ruler of the throne, you're here to obey and serve me, which is Genesis 2, and a magnanimous choice, liberational, creative freedom mentality. It says, I have created you in love for you to create in love. And there's your two gods, if you will. And we have to choose which God we're going to be inspired by, learn from, be ennobled by. And to me, there's no contest here as a man. The first Genesis 1 version allows me to be the creative, caring, loving, strong person. Because even when I'm weak or frail or vulnerable, I can still say that the substance that I'm made out of is blessed, is powerful, is creative, is spiritual.
Yes.
And there's a grace, there's a mercy that will help carry me through things. And now I look at other people, I'm not suspicious or trying to use them or worried about them using me. I'm saying, okay, that person is provided as a blessing to me. And I'm provided in my own uniqueness and difference as a blessing to them. To really engage and create something more amazing between us together, as well as from me. So that's how I look at it.
Yes, absolutely. And I can attest to all of that, all of it. And that you live by those words and you live by that. Those are the dictates that allow you to kind of show up in the world the way you do and be incredibly helpful to others as a result of it. And so along that route, now we're getting into the whole MeToo thing. The Academy Awards just passed. Everybody was talking about it. It was right up front in the, comedic monologues and such. And now you see articles popping up that MeToo has gone global. And basically women are saying, we've had it. We're not going to take this anymore. And now this can be a very complex discussion because we've all become complicit in it. Just like a mother with her, adoring her new baby boy. Globally, historically, once a male pops out of the womb, they're given a different status in life, and the girls are expected to be a good girl, a totally different set of standards. And that's landed us where we are today. Right? Maybe you can just pick it up there with the stories of the women, having to deal with groping just to be able to do their job and get ahead, but take it more deeply than that into your wheelhouse.
Yeah, I've said this before because men have been trained to deny these things. I said, listen, the difference between a supportive pat on the back from a guy to a woman and sexual harassment could be just that tiny extra bit of pressure that sends that intention right through that hand, right into the person's body, right? And then I was going to say, as a result of this, women have been made to think that they're sick, bad, stupid, or crazy in some ways for challenging that. And the guy just says, hey, it was just a supportive pat, he's not stupid, she's not stupid. The energy of that intention is going right through that hand. That extra little teeny bit of pressure says, I have dominance over you, okay? No one's being fooled here. We're playing a game, and women have to experience the consequences of that. And what ends up happening is they start feeling guilty, or they start feeling like, again, Faye said, sick, bad, stupid, or crazy. Wait a minute. I'm feeling, my intuitive bells are going off here. And I can feel the energy of that person's touch coming through me, but everyone's just trying to pass it off, because it doesn't, from the outside, look like something bad, And this is where I think we could all, first of all, I think women can take some solace in the notion that you're not crazy. This is actually happening. This is a product of patriarchy. A man's worth is based largely upon his relative worth, his dominance over others, getting what he wants, quote unquote. Now, this isn't healthy. It's not healthy for men. It's not healthy even for the predators. But it's a product of this kind of training or indoctrination. So we're trying to disrupt this. And the first step in disrupting is to realize you're not crazy when you feel these kinds of things. Generally speaking, I mean, there are some women that are a little bit way too sensitive. Generally speaking, 99% of the women have a real point. And so we start there. And it's not just about comfort. It's not just about sexual harassment training. These are all pretty, sensitivity training. These are all pretty superficial. It comes down to respect and a new way for men and women to relate. And in my counseling, a lot of what I do is just give women permission and also to support them in understanding that their intuitions are correct. That's the first step. And also that they have the ability to choose away from that. And it's not hurting. They don't have to feel guilty about that. It's not hurting the other person. To go back to your indulgence of males, this confusion of love with indulgence in raising males is a huge, huge handicap. Because what ends up happening is you're reinforcing the lowest character of the man, right? Rather than the highest character. You're saying, you don't have to work. You're lazy but brilliant. No, you're lazy, period. And this is, if you want to raise a man with large male, with really high and noble character, you are going not to ride him. You're not going to say, get down on it, but you're going to say, I really expect more. There was a story with my mom when she doesn't even remember it, but I had just taken a pillow from a hotel room on a family trip. And she goes, where did this pillow come from? And I said, I felt, like I needed a pillow, and, there weren't enough in the car. So I took one. She goes, well, that is the lowest form of thievery. I swear I didn't steal anything else after that, because she had cut right to the core of an expectation which was reasonable, which was noble, which got to who I wanted to be as a person. And she didn't make excuses for me. She didn't coddle me. She said, as my son and as someone I adore, I expect the best of you, not the worst. And this is one of the things that really has to change if we're going to have high quality men out there. Men cannot be coddled, made excuses for, because then they turn into predators, like the Weinsteins of the world. And then, then we're left basically trying to unravel habits that have such momentum.
And so what's happened then alongside that, as the patriarchy has existed, is the women have been dependent upon the men for their mere survival and for the survival of their children. So
Right.
you learn how to be more, living in a more shadowy world, oftentimes of subtle manipulation, like
Right.
you said, of not telling the truth, not speaking up and sharing your true feelings because of this incarnation. If you've been incarnating as a woman dominantly, this is built in to learn to protect yourself by minimizing things that could rock your boat in the world. And so I mentioned that because one of the things when you and I personally first got together, agreed the one thing that has to happen above all is absolute transparency, absolute truth, no matter how uncomfortable it was for either one of us, which is the journey really we have to take en masse now, right?
It is. I mean, again, it's a win-win proposition when men and women respect each other and try to lift each other to be the best of each other. And that's basically where we are now. The old way of understanding it was what I don't believe, that there's such a thing as a win-lose, right? That you can put someone else down or take energy from them and quote unquote win. That's what I call a lose-lose situation, because for the person who is the taker, they handicap, disable their ability to give, which is our birthright, which is the whole reason why we're here, to offer our divine genius, to offer something into the world. And when we support each other to be our best, it may be difficult, because and you and I understand this, you expose the more vulnerable or dispossessed or frail parts of ourselves that we've hidden away because we didn't feel like we could share them with another person. We didn't really trust ourselves or trust the other person. So it does bring up these really kind of poignant or fragile places in ourselves. But if we can agree to be open and honest, as you're talking about, and not expect the other person to be perfect or fulfill some projection of ours, the gifts are unimaginable. You know, now you see what is really possible. You can see what grace really is. You can be weak, you know, in the presence of another person, and they can put their arms around you and not be defensive and not project things back at you, you know, and not make you the bad person. We're helping to bring up a really key issue that's going to help improve a relationship. And in this, I have to apologize for women out there, because men have, when they're brought into that more fragile place, and the woman is asking him to share his feelings, and she's even providing a place for that, few men take that up. And I hope that I can change that with this book, The Spiritually Competent Man, to see the power of that, the creative, even male energy that can be brought with that opening, that magnanimous providing. Like I said, the provider of the feast. One of the ways men can provide that feast is to really appreciate and open themselves to a woman who is trying to share her feelings with him and encouraging him to share his feelings with her.
Yeah, well, I was just going to interject something. It is interesting because this provision, this notion of provision, you know, a lot of classical literature and women's studies would say, well, men have to dominate because they feel a loss of power because they don't have the ability to give birth and give life and all that. And it's almost in a way become a cliche. But right. What we haven't looked at is what the man is capable of bringing into the world in that conversation. You don't hear this in women's studies. You do not. And there are no men's studies that really address this directly either, which is right. By not having the duty to care for so many other people that women have historically had, the men often have this energy freed up to really delve into the higher potential, the higher view, the spiritual view, as in the great philosophers, poets, and writers throughout history have dominantly been men because they have had the time and space and energy to be able to think into these higher realms. So men can give birth to amazingly deep spiritual concepts that are useful and such. And this is a gift that some of the greatest men on the planet have given to right. societies that have lasted through history, but instead it's being dumbed down and used for petty dominance.
Exactly. There's two things that feminists get wrong. I'm an ardent pro-feminist man. You know, a lot of my understanding, emotional understanding, even my understanding of my masculinity owes itself to lesbian, even lesbian feminist analysis of how males, you know, operate in the world. Some of the most interesting analyses come from that. So I appreciate that. But some of the things there are a couple of things that have been, I think, gotten wrong by women's studies, and for all the things that they've gotten right. And one of them is that patriarchy benefits men. It does not, especially on a spiritual, emotional level. The cost of patriarchy on men is far worse than any kind of material or physical, political, economic gain that they can get. And the other part of it is this: by concentrating too much on the envy that men have and the desire to control women because they can't give birth and can't suckle a child and that sort of thing, neglects the very, very important spiritual contribution that men can make, in which they can give birth, not to babies, obviously, but to ideas and powerful new inventions. And they're giving birth to these kinds of things that can extend our consciousness, can support a woman, you know? And that's true also in terms of generosity of spirit, and being a father, and being a brother, and being a son, to again be that provider of the feet, to support, to wrap the arms around a woman and say, I want you to be the most, you know, demonstrated, evolved, blossomed, you know, being in the universe, you know, that I take great pride in, that I'm not competitively saying, if you make more money than I do, or if somehow you get, you know, some kind of success, that somehow that makes me less. See, that's the damage of patriarchy, that somebody else's success would make me feel worse about myself, you know, as a man. That's that. Just take a look at that for a second. Yeah. See how that's operating.
Yes, and one of the other things you point out in the book is that with men, oftentimes, and we know this through the cliche dance of women asking for directions when you're lost, and men saying, we'll get there, which is this notion that men often live under this burden of thinking they have to know, they
right.
have to be correct, they have to be right, rather than being open to saying, you know, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. You say that if men could shift just that one viewpoint alone,
right,
I don't know the answer, but I'm willing to learn, that the planet would change overnight. Talk about that for a little bit.
Absolutely. Real men and real authority is not the presumption of knowing, right? It's the desire to find out. And then through experience and commitment, gaining knowledge which you can share with others. Instead of pretending to know, putting other people down when they challenge you because you really don't know. It's just a facade anyway. And then creating a situation in which ignorance is king rather than actual knowledge, in which treating other people poorly dominates over caring. So, I mean, when I put it this way, everyone's going to go, of course, women and men. You're absolutely right, Zeus. I'm saying, well, then why are we letting a system get away with that being, in a sense, the rule? Okay, we do not have to bow to these gods that make dominance and subservience and lack of choice and lack of appreciation of difference and polarity and talent of other people to be the rule. We can actually follow or admit higher principles and our own higher parts of ourselves that make love, care, mutual respect, transparency, and honesty, like we were saying before, the rule. Okay? Those have been made weak. Those have been called weak qualities. Those have been called qualities where you could be taken advantage of. They are not. They're very strong and high qualities, and if they're used with a degree of spiritual confidence, they provide you with more strength and ability to call out people who are abusive or call out people who would exploit you rather than less. And that's one of the big lies as well for men. They have been taught, and women to a certain degree too, have been taught, oh, these are weak qualities, fragile qualities, intuition, feeling. And I'm like, bull. I call you on that, because that's exactly what motivates me on a spiritual level. And it's exactly what gives me such a sense of presence around the truth. And I will bring that truth forward. I do in my book. And, you know, I can't wait to begin to share it on a wider level. But you and I have talked about this. We have said no God, meaning any higher principle or anything that we acknowledge as something we learn from, no God worth its salt would ever insist upon obedience. Every higher being or higher principle wants us to have choice, wants us to contribute, wants us to test things in our own experience to see, because truth doesn't have to be proven, it has to be demonstrated, it has to be experienced. That's why it's the truth. And it's only when the truth is kept in the dark by these kinds of things that make you feel insecure. One of the big things I say to my female clients is there's two things. One, I ask them to use the word I choose, okay, to reclaim their sovereignty. And the other thing is that I say, is this true? Stay in your truth. your intuition is correct. You know, you're not sick, bad, stupid, or crazy. You are there. You're assessing this. So be calm in that and be generous in that. And that gives you a place where you can even say to someone who's even been not very nice to you, hey, I've learned certain things from you, but these things I feel deeply and I'm going to act upon them, and I'll be consistent and firm on them. I won't accept this kind of behavior. I will do these kinds of things that are going to enhance me or the family because they are providing health and raising things up, and I will be consistent in that, and I will seek support for that. And I won't compromise on that. And that's important. That's not only a declaration of independence and freedom from a failed system that is hurting both men and women, but it's also leading the way forward into the higher, into love, into these things that are very powerful, powerful spiritual forces if we only choose to let them into the world and demonstrate them and stay behind them.
Absolutely. Very well put. And, you know, we look at what's happening right now in contrast to that. It's like, why now? This is the perfect storm. We have a president that has, you know, been accused of, on many occasions, of groping and covering up and using ignorance in the place of truth, where truth isn't even a concept that matters anymore. I mean, and that is the president of the theoretically still the most powerful, influential country in the world. So it's a top-down thing. And so it seems to me it was absolutely perfect timing for the MeToo movement to come out. And again, there is a backlash. And I have to say, you know, even in my own situation, I've been in the television industry since I was 23, 24 years old. I mean, I've spent my whole life in, quote, showbiz, news, you know, telejournalism. And of course I had my experiences with that. And you just, you know, I just, like everyone else, you just say, he's just a guy. It's like, hey, knock it off. Someone tries to pat you inappropriately or whatever, knock it off. Or someone who's married that you're working with on a crew is hitting on you to, you know, get something going. It's like, hey, you're married, knock it off. You know, my whole thing is just knock it off. Just brush them away. And I never told anybody. I didn't tell the station director or managers about it. Everyone in our field dealt with that. It was just a common occurrence of working in a man's world. Yeah,
and you know, if a woman is under the sway of a man, she's say a single mother, and she's got to bring food home to her kids. She's got to choose in that kind of situation. She may feel she has to choose between putting up with that kind of behavior from a guy who's sexually harassing her at work and making sure she has a stable job to put food on the table for her kids. So I'm deeply empathetic to that. What I find is one of the more powerful things that has happened recently in the last 40 years, mainly 40 to 60 years, is that women have become more financially independent. And so they are able to speak up more because in many ways they could get another job at another place, and they're able to call that out. Now, what is unfortunate is so much of this, and you see this even in the commentary in Hollywood and so forth, is the kind of self-deprecation by the guy. Yeah, I know we've done this. We'll work on it. That's not good enough, okay? This is a learning opportunity for men to learn into their behavior and their emotions, not to simply just change their behavior, but to change their active values. What is this actually showing us? What's the learning moment here for men that's on a positive level? Instead of saying, okay, I'm a guy, you know, yeah, or I'm not one of those guys, I respect my women, say, why is it that we've all been participating in this and not saying anything? I can't tell you how many, sexist jokes have been told, you know, or I've overheard, and I know these men are good men, but they don't call men on that privately or publicly for doing that. You know, it's like, you know, and women as well, they feel like, well, you know, he's a good enough guy, maybe he's kind of inappropriate, I don't want to push the issue. And the reason why people are not pushing the issue is they think, well, they're just going to be insulting that person or creating a conflict. Where I see it as an opportunity. Why not just say, wait a minute there. You hear what you just said? You know, do you realize it could be taken in a completely different way, you know, as a way that was disrespectful? Just letting you know, I'm not trying to get on you, right? But here's how I felt about it. Okay?
Exactly. I think that's I think
Right.
that's the way that women really can step up and call it
Right.
out. Even,
Right. You're not criticizing the person. You're helping to open their mind. You're being very clear, and you're also kind of having their intent, giving them their best intention. Okay. And I think that would work even if it wasn't a good intention, because the person they would realize you're being magnanimous, and they would also have a non-threatening way to be let know that their zipper is open, except
right.
it has to do with sexual harassment in this case, or perceived sexual harassment. And that's the way to move forward. We are imperfect people. We are learning, and that's fine. We can't allow ourselves to kowtow to the system. And I don't think it helps to just ride herd and come over really strong over the top and shake a finger at someone. That man will go right into a shell. You're not going to learn anything under a state of threat like that. But there has to be firmness and consistency, a certain warmth to it, and a desire to see the best in someone and not the worst.
And there has been, I think, in a few cases, some cases, a little collateral damage along the way. And one that I felt really badly about, I have to say, was what happened with Al Franken.
Right.
Back in my NBC days, I can't say I knew him, but he would come into the studio and sit down next to me when we were watching the games between our little breaks where we had to kind of give the playbacks and such. And just a nice, courteous man, but he was a Saturday Night Live player. These guys are living on the edge of adrenaline like nothing you can even imagine. I was there. I saw, Gilda Radner and Jane Chastain and these women in the theater. I mean, in our studios. And so I witnessed this whole thing. I'd go to their shows live and watch what it was like. And so in a situation like that, where you have people that are all hopped up, it's a unique situation, to do some kind of inappropriate, gropey kind of, jokes and all that is just that in that sense to me was really overplayed and taken out of context for the man, the quality man that Al Franken actually is. And I thought he went down, personally, I thought he went down unfairly. There's a point at which we really have to modulate that line because we are imperfect and we are all still learning this together. Women are enabling men to be that way, and men are stepping over the line. And the things you've just said are absolutely right on, and what it's going to take to stop that dynamic.
Right. I mean, you can. I mean, and this is an opportunity for women to learn, to communicate their desires and feelings more. If they're feeling pressured, even if it's just from a guy who's kind of ignorant, a little bit horny, or whatever it happens to be able to say, just physically take the person's hand and put it to the side, but gently, warmly say, I'm not really there yet, and be able to say, and there's a certain leadership, there's a certain possession of feminine energy. One of the things I talk about in this book is how wonderful it is to have feminine and masculine polarity, right? That nice dance between feminine receptive energy and masculine, initiative energy. And this is not to say men and women can't share these. We should have strong feminine, masculine qualities within ourselves, but allowing ourselves to exchange that and to create information, again, transparency and honesty about what we desire, rather than having to keep it inside because we're afraid we're going to hurt somebody's feelings or create some kind of discomfort in the situation. If we had a little bit more of a sense of openness and communicating directly, I think it would work best for everybody,
I agree with that. And, I know every now and then we'll just kind of talk anonymously about some of your work that goes on. And I know with some clients, women in particular, they always come and they're carrying this huge burden that they're not enough, they've done something wrong. And, in one case, the husband turns out to be a porn addict, and because she feels like she's not hot enough to carry the relationship. And another situation, the man's, calling her a narcissist when he's an extreme narcissist himself. And this is a notion you touched on earlier, is the men take oftentimes this behavior, this irresponsible behavior, and the woman becomes the dumping ground. And it's all projected back on her. And it's almost impossible for relationships to survive this.
Yeah, I think that one of the great tragedies between men and women, especially in romantic relationships, is that men's sense of worth is hollowed out by patriarchy, okay? They're saying you can't be a man unless you're doing nasty things basically to other people, you know, and you can't be whole. I mean, men's identity is largely fractured. You know, it's like you're spinning a bunch of plates, trying to, again, pretend you know something you don't, pretending to be something you aren't. And so it creates this really unstable basis for identity. And, you know, obviously in an ideal world, man and woman in a romantic relationship would just learn from each other. You know, would ask questions, have a conversation. And instead, many men are coming into the situation being trained, especially in adolescence, to view women as objects or extensions of themselves. And when women get uppity, which is not uppity at all, is simply just voicing their own opinion and talking, you know, communicating their limits and communicating their own desires for how they would like to be treated, the guy feels it as a pressure, or the guy feels it as a criticism, rather than an entry point into conversation. And then what oftentimes happens is that guys will act as if that a person attacked them, fire out all that energy and projection, and turn it around. I can't tell you how many women I have talked to have said the same thing. I earnestly offered something, and he turned it right around back at me and made it like a critique and the basis for attacking me and destabilizing me. What's going on here? Well, I'll give you a little secret of what's going on there. First, you're not crazy. You did the right thing by opening up, by communicating. That set off some kind of trigger in the man. It's not your fault. You don't have to be guilty for it. You know, don't take it on, even if he's trying to make you take it on. You have to call that man out for everyone's sake, for his sake, for your sake, maybe a family as well. Because again, if that doesn't happen, if a man's behavior, his projection is dumping his emotional baggage and his own emotional triggers on you, when you're actually trying to help improve the situation, then what ends up happening is his own energy and his own frequency gets lowered. At a certain point, he has to learn those things. It's unfortunate that a lot of the ways in which males are raised by mothers, but also you know, being influenced by pornographic images and the objectification of women, it's more difficult for men to do that. Literally, they think if they are opening themselves to a woman or to the feminine force, or even to you know, cultural symbols of women like nature, even something as basic as nature, that somehow they're being made vulnerable and open to attack. That's the training that they have had, okay? And that's what women don't get. They're like, wait a minute, I'm being loving, I'm being open, or being a vulnerable situation, I'm being supportive. Why is this guy coming out after me like this? Because that man has been taught and has his emotional triggers arranged around the notion of emotional sensitivity and vulnerability, meaning he's gay, meaning he's weak, meaning he's vulnerable, and he's going to be abused in the next second. That's his trigger. That's his training. And it is very difficult to break through that. I mean, literally, it's part of what's guiding this book and my desire to step out in strength, in masculine strength, and say, wait a minute, we men can, in the highest parts of self, not only embrace this, but learn to do this well, right? To be present to a woman who wants to just be listened to and not have her problem solved, you know, not have, you know, her existence or life being turned into a problem to be solved by a guy. You know, that's one of the classic complaints of women. I want to be listened to. I want to go into these feelings, and he's looking at it as a problem to be solved, to be fended out, and to be dispatched and chucked to the side. I'm very empathetic to that because I tend to be a more feeling person myself. I don't like that to happen. And I've had that happen in some of my relationships with women who are more guy-like in that way than I was. So it's not going to be, you know, an overnight type of thing, obviously. But if we can begin to call truth into the situation, develop some skills around it, help people understand they're not crazy for wanting that it is actually higher and stronger to be in this sensitive, straightforward, firm, transparent, and honest way, then we will begin to start to turn the tide a little bit. And we will make real improvements, substantial improvements, and not just superficial improvements around behavior and more obvious or overt signs that we're seeing being revealed now. we can take this time with the MeToo movement and others to start going beyond the superficial into something a little bit deeper that actually has positive opportunity in it, besides just remedying injustices and historical inequalities and so forth.
It has a chance to bring the whole notion of relationship on every level to a higher frequency. Just what you say, by just simply calling out what is incorrect and should not be occurring anymore, and by stating our own truths and our own needs in a very truthful and calm way, rather than trying to make the other person wrong. I mean, that would be a huge step forward for humanity.
It really would. And if guys could just ask this one question, why are you reacting like this? You know this person, okay, is someone that you supposedly love, okay? Well, give them their due. Say to yourself, okay, I might be feeling threatened, but I know it's coming from someone I love. I'm going to be brave enough to deal with that sense of threat and actually hear and listen. That's a heroic act. That is one of the most heroic acts that a man can do. Men seems like they would rather jump off hillsides, or do dumb stunts on dirt bikes that could kill them, than to take that small step of letting go of that emotional branch and letting themselves fall into an unpredictable situation where they just have to be transparent and honest with their partner. So, I think, maybe this is an advertisement to guys out there. Why not see this as emotional adventure? Because it sure feels like it. It feels risky. It feels like there's lots of rocks. It feels like you're going to be doing a triple backflip sometimes when you're engaging, emotions and your own sensitivity and your own triggers. But that's what it's about. I mean, that should be able to appeal to men's sense of adventure, and not be like some kind of, oh, here we go again. We're talking about our feelings again. Really feel the sense of that emotional openness, risk, adventure, when you're really starting to plumb those things.
Well, it's the men that write all of the really juicy, sappy love songs and always have, and plays and everything else. It's like, but they just can't confront it in the context or in front of someone else, especially if that is someone that they feel they could be made to feel vulnerable with. So I think your words of wisdom are fabulous. And also, we didn't even go into a lot of things that I had planned to in my little script. I always, prepare, even with you. I've got to prepare. But we'll save that for another conversation, because there's a lot of deep stuff in here. And one of the really fun things we didn't get into this time, but we will because it's a larger conversation, is something that happened when I was interviewing Sheila Gillette in the Theo group recently at Gaia. I said, was there ever a time when women were in control and abused men? And they said, yes, there have been those times. And we got into this deeper discussion about why. And so maybe we'll pick our next conversation up with that, how this patriarchy in some cases also may have come to be. And then by then your book will be out, and we can get into some of the other areas of the book besides just the patriarchy as well. So any final thoughts?
I just want to, I want to reinforce the notion here that to the women in your audience and to the men in your audience, that women, first of all, you're not crazy. Your deeper sense and intuition is right on target. Allow yourself, it may not be absolutely perfect, but the main part of it, in my experience, is there. And I just want to affirm that. No amount of shouting down or trying to make you feel little should keep you from going deeply in, consulting with your highest part of yourself and affirming these things. And especially if it's done in a positive framework, I think it can be extraordinarily powerful. And if it's done firmly and consistently, and you find support for that with other women and men who do value that, that is the way forward. And for men, again, I want to repeat, see this as an adventure, as a heroic adventure to be a provider of the feast. If you have the time, I invite you to take the quick course. It's on the tabs of my askdrzeus.com website. And one of the things that's in there, and I especially think this is going to be appropriate for men who are accused of being somewhat boring in their relationships, are a little too predictable, is, and this is based on research, is to do something pleasant of a surprising nature to someone that you love. In this case, it could be an introverted guy who tends to just stay at home and maybe cook a little bit, taking that person out for an unexpected meal, a movie, or even dancing, just really getting out of the comfort zone and just saying, hey, I'm an adventurer. I'm willing to take these sort of risks. It's my rebellion against patriarchy, and I'm going to burst out of my box. I'm going to be a complete fool, and I'm going to embrace this and love it. And we're going to have a talk about how afraid I felt and how awkward I felt, and we're going to have a good laugh about it as well. You know, these are the kinds of real ways that we rebel against patriarchy, and we rebel against these sort of things that would keep us down, is by creatively engaging them and being a little bit outrageous, you know, bursting out of that box and not worrying so much about how we look, you know, and beginning to feel the confidence, the spiritual confidence in that, because now your energy is flowing. And pay attention to your intuition, pay attention to your energy flow there, you know, and pay attention to the adrenaline and all those other things that happen here, and realize this is the adventure and this is the opportunity.
Zeus, thank you so much. I mean, I spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different topics. I mean, you know, the nature of what it is to be human, but also alien life force here on the planet and everything in between. But the reality is, this game isn't going to shift until human beings can show up for each other, become honest and transparent, and start lifting into much more truthful, higher frequencies. So I appreciate your words very much, and we'll pick up this conversation again later. I'll see you upstairs for a cup of tea in a couple of minutes. And in the interim, if any of you would like to go into a conversation with Zeus directly, you can just go to his website, askdrzeus.com. Until next time, thank you for joining us here on reginameredith.com.